Welcome to Phrasal Verb Practice. This is the place to learn real English, one phrasal verb at a time. My name is Marissa, and I'll walk you through this learning journey. Hello, everyone. Trust you're all well. In today's session, we'll cover and practice the phrasal verb cut back. So let's talk about what cut back actually means. In general, cut back has one main meaning, and we use it in many everyday situations. When we say cut back, we mean to reduce the amount of something, not stop completely, just do less than before. For example, I'm trying to cut back on sugar. The company decided to cut back on expenses. He wants to cut back on working late. The idea here is simple. You're choosing to lower the level of something on purpose. Now, let's look at how this idea sounds in other languages, just quickly. In Spanish, it's like saying reducir or disminuir. In French, it's réduire. In Portuguese, reduzir. In Italian, ridurre. In German, reduzieren or einschränken. In Japanese, hieras. And in Chinese, jianshao or xiejian. Now, when do people usually use cut back? People use cut back when they want to save money, when they're trying to be healthier, when work feels like too much, when a company needs to control costs, or when someone wants a better balance in life. Basically, when time, money, or energy feels limited. Let's hear a few clear examples to bring it all together. She decided to cut back on coffee. We need to cut back on unnecessary meetings. He's trying to cut back on screen time. The team was asked to cut back on spending this quarter. I had to cut back on projects to avoid burnout. Now let's talk a bit about how we use cut back grammatically. Cut back is inseparable. That means we don't put the object in the middle. We normally use this structure: cut back on plus noun or gerund. For example, cut back on expenses, cut back on working overtime, cut back on sugar. We don't say cut back expenses. And we don't say, cut expenses back. If you're using a pronoun, it's the same idea. You still keep on. She needs to cut back on it. I'm trying to cut back on them. And just to note, the verb form doesn't change. It's cut back in the present, the past, and the participle. All right, now let's practice. First, you'll hear a short text about everyday life. Then you'll hear another one in a professional or office situation. Are you ready? Let's start. Lately, I've been trying to slow things down a little. Nothing dramatic, just small changes. It started when I looked at my grocery receipt and realized how much I was spending without noticing. That's when I told myself I needed to cut back a bit. Not stop enjoying things, just be more aware. So I decided to cut back on eating out during the week. Instead of grabbing coffee every morning, I started making it at home. At first, it felt strange, like something was missing, but after a few days, it felt normal. I even told my sister I was trying to cut back on sugar, and she laughed because she knows how much I love dessert. At home, we also talked about money. Not in a stressful way, just honestly. We agreed to cut back on unnecessary subscriptions and see which ones we actually used. It was surprising how easy it was to let some go. Little by little, we started to cut back on spending without really feeling like we were giving things up. It wasn't just about money, though. I realized I needed to cut back on how late I stayed up scrolling on my phone. I wanted more energy in the morning. So I set a simple rule: no phone after a certain hour. It helped more than I expected. Even on weekends, I tried to cut back on overplanning. Fewer errands, fewer commitments, more time at home. I noticed that when I cut back on rushing around, I felt calmer and more present with the people around me. My parents did something similar. They decided to cut back on work hours where possible and spend more time together. Nothing extreme, just a small shift. What I learned is that when you cut back thoughtfully, life doesn't feel smaller. It actually feels lighter. You still enjoy things, you just choose them more carefully. Great, that was the first text. How many times did you hear the phrasal verb of the day? Now, let's move on to the second text. At the start of the quarter, our manager called a team meeting. Nothing felt tense, but the message was clear. Budgets were tighter, and we needed to cut back where it made sense. Not freeze everything, just be smarter about how we worked. The first thing we talked about was travel. We agreed to cut back on in-person meetings when a call would do the job. It wasn't about avoiding collaboration. It was about using time and money better. After that, the project leads reviewed their plans and looked for areas to cut back without slowing progress. A few days later, I sent an email to my team suggesting we cut back on long status meetings. Instead of weekly one-hour calls, we moved to shorter check-ins. People appreciated it. When we cut back on unnecessary meetings, everyone had more time to focus. As deadlines approached, workload came up. Some people were clearly stretched. So we decided to cut back on low-priority tasks and focus on what really mattered. That shift helped morale more than expected. When you cut back on extra pressure, people work better, not less. There was also a conversation about expenses. Nothing dramatic. We just chose to cut back on small things that added up over time. Fewer rush orders, more planning ahead. It was a simple change, but it made a difference. Personally, I had to cut back on working late every night. I talked to my manager, and we reorganized responsibilities. Once I cut back on overtime, my work during the day actually improved. By the end of the month, the results were clear. We didn't lose momentum. We didn't lose quality. We just learned how to cut back in the right places. The team felt more balanced, more focused, and more in control of how we worked together. Great, that was the second text, and that's all for today. Thank you so much for following this channel, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.